Hello, everybody, and welcome again. We are going to continue a little bit with the Civil War here. And what we're going to talk about first is the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is the war has already been going on, and this is shortly issued after the Battle of Antietam, which we'll definitely talk about a little bit later. The part about battles is coming up soon here. But at any rate, after the very bloody Battle of Antietam, which was a win for the Union. No one really won. There's so many deaths happened in Antietam. In fact, it was the single bloodiest. Let me rephrase that. It was the bloodiest single-day battle of the entire war. Now, of course, Gettysburg killed more people, but that was over 3 days. So, at any rate, after Antietam, which was supposed to be a victory, and is very important. The reason why Lincoln had to wait for a victory to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, because if it came after defeat or tie or something like that, Lincoln feared that would make him look desperate, like, oh, this is our last thing that we have to do. The only way we can make this work. But at any rate, after Antietam, Lincoln felt it was the right time to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, emancipation, of course, means to be free, and proclamation is I proclaim a statement. And this freed all slaves in Confederate-held territory. Now, this is important. The Confederate-held territory part is important because the proclamation did not free any slaves immediately, because the slaves the proclamation freed, the ones in Confederate-held territory, could not be reached by Union forces. So in many ways, people felt that it was a symbolic move more than anything else, but it was effective, at least because it gave the slaves behind Confederate lines at least something to rally for or something to anticipate. Now, of course, this also means that the border states, which of course were slave-holding states that fought for the Union, they were still able to be with the Union. Now, if Lincoln would have said we're freeing all the slaves everywhere, then probably the border states would have, well, we don't say would have, might have left the Union, and that would have been a whole other situation that they'd have to deal with. So, the other effect that the Emancipation Proclamation had also had to do with foreign relations. And because the proclamation made slavery the central issue of the war at that point, being saying, hey, we are now drawing attention to the slaves, and that is unable, and it's becoming a very central issue of the war. So many of the anti-slavery countries, many in Europe, shifted public opinion in favor of the Union. And at the point this time, they were sort of, well, we don't want to, Britain and things, oh, well, we don't want to get involved in either one. It's none of our business. We don't want to pick sides. And the Emancipation Proclamation caused the countries in Europe that had already outlawed slavery to sort of take the Union side, if you will. And that's why I'm saying the Shin opinion prevented any of the foreign countries from recognizing the Confederate States of America as a legitimate government, because if they were recognizing the Confederate States, who were now clearly the issue was slavery, then it would be looked at as, well, England or France or whatever, you're endorsing slavery, you're supporting slavery. And that's not something that they wanted to do. Obviously, in any sort of war, there's going to be all sorts of injuries and battles and all sorts of stuff. And the term hospital, I guess, it's appropriate, but in all honesty, you're better off on the front lines than you are in a hospital or in a camp. Taking a look at camp life, and this is true. I mean, it's technically more dangerous to be in a camp or a hospital. You have higher rate of death. And that's both for Union and Confederate. Hygiene was absolutely terrible, and it's really, quite disgusting. But even though we're pretty sure about the germ theory of disease, at this point, I guess people just didn't care. No washing of the hands, very little shower or bathing at all. Soap wasn't necessarily widely available. Make things worse, their water was unsafe because they set up the bathrooms upstream in many cases from them. So people would, use the bathroom, and then it would come down through the stream as they're down camp, and the water would flow down there. It's really, really hard to understand why people would do that, especially, it's not like they didn't know. I mean, the germ theory of disease, like I said, it's pretty clear at this point. Of course, typhoid also is a disease that we don't really have to deal with much anymore, but in dirty conditions and things like that. Dysentery and diarrhea, 57,000 dead. Can you imagine dying from diarrhea? It probably not the best way to go. So if you look at in terms of the total numbers, you say 224,000 troops for the Union died from disease, and 110,000 died from battle. So you're twice as likely to die from disease than from battle. Now, disease doesn't mean, oh, I caught a cold or chicken pox or anything like that. Often, diseases from wounds. And if you look at this beautiful case of instruments, I mean, it looks like someone's going to go like work on wood or something like that. I guess that is their surgery kit. I'm not sure why they have a hacksaw there, but yeah, I don't know if I was in the hospital and the doctor came in and he took out his tools and it looked like that, I'd probably try to run away at any rate. But that's why, minor wounds would often lead to amputation or infection. And remember, this is very important. Antibiotics do not exist at this point. That wasn't until 1900s certainly, and so that's why it's very, very easy for a minor wound to get infected and spread. And now, even though we said they understood germ theory of disease, they say poor understanding, and I'm not really sure if I buy that 100%. I think it was more of just a matter of practicality. So many injured. There wasn't enough supplies, wasn't enough time, really, necessarily. I know it sounds gross, but to wash your hands or to sterilize the equipment. And so you did have things spreading. No anesthesia, and if it was available, it was very, very, very poor quality. It was sort of like hit or miss. If you add too much, oops, I guess they stop breathing. If you add too little, they'll wake up in the middle of surgery. Not so good. No official painkillers. They'd often resort to alcohol for that. Like we mentioned, no antibiotics, and this leads to death in many cases. And if you are in so much pain for a long period of time, that eventually can wear you down and cause you to, lose energy and eventually die even. In addition to this, very little time to bathe and wash clothing. Many troops lived with body lice. Oh, and these wool outfits, just terrible. Well, there were some, I guess, technological improvements. Certainly, the most famous one, the ironclad ships, the Merrimack and the Monitor, and they're shooting each other, bouncing off, and things like that. That was a fairly good advancement. Naval mines, torpedoes. Later in the war, they sunk about 40 Union ships. So torpedoes, the rifle kit, and that's what this is right here. So this is why it's called a rifle. And if you notice the grooves in here, they're sort of like spinning. It causes a bullet, in this case what they call a mini ball, it causes that to spin and rotate. And so when you cut spiral grooves in the barrel of a musket, it made it much more accurate and it allowed it to travel much further. And that's what's a rifle, and it'd be more steady. It's kind of like if you think of a football. When you throw a football, you have to have some spin on it, otherwise it won't go straight. And there's also the Gatling gun, which is over there, which is a type of machine gun. The reason why it's not considered a machine gun is because there's multiple barrels. As you can see, each one of these barrels would rotate and it would shoot a bullet, and the next one would come around and shoot another one. And then this, of course, is the mini ball right here, is a type of ammunition that they used. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening.